So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm very much looking forward to a lively discussion at today's webinar on data breaches for charities. My name is Joe Smart, and I am the General Counsel, Head of Compliance and Interim Head of Risk at QBE Insurance. Now, that's a lot of titles, and today I will be adding one more. I'm also going to be the moderator of this fine panel, so that's nice for me. Another feather in my cap. This is, in fact, the second iteration of the event in collaboration with Bono SG. The first was held pre-COVID, which obviously now seems like a distant memory. But it's quite apt that we're revisiting this topic now, because if you consider the spike in cyber attacks during COVID and the upward trend that we've seen after, it's definitely time to have another think about cyber. On to a bit of housekeeping. For those of you who've joined in person, exit signs are over there, just in case of an emergency. Hopefully we shouldn't see anything like that. There's also bathrooms just down there on the right-hand side, same follow the exit signs. For some Q&A for everyone, we have Pigeonhole Live, and you can submit your questions there. If you have a smartphone or tablet, just launch the internet browser and enter www.pigeonhole.at. The passcode is data0410, and that's shown on the slide now. Alternatively, if you've joined online, you can click on the link that's been shared in the chat function on your desktop or laptop. One final point, although I'm a lawyer and as is Pippa here, today's discussion is not a substitute for professional legal advice. So if you do require that advice, please do consult your lawyer. That's enough of me rabbiting on. So let's start delving into some topics. We've invited a very, very special panel today of Pippa, Manish and Arati. Guys, could I just get you to introduce yourselves and tell the audience here about, what you do, what you're up to and what brings you here today?
Sure. So my name is Pippa Austin. I work at Kennedy's Legal Solutions. I am in charge of cyber for the Southeast Asia region. So my main sort of remit is Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam. We work on these matters in conjunction a lot of the time with Arati and Manish here. So we provide advice in relation to data privacy issues, regulatory issues, etc. after there's been a cyber incident. So I do have some slides. They are very information heavy. And I have done that so that I can circulate them at the end of this so that you can have the information available to you, but don't worry, I'll try not to bore you with them as we go through the discussion today.
Thanks, Pippa. Lawyers are never boring, so that's a good thing. So,
said by another lawyer.
Thank you. My name is Manish Chawda. I'm one of the co-founders for Pragma. We're a global cybersecurity firm. I gotta say, I probably have one of the best jobs in the world. So day in, day out, I'm dealing with companies who get hacked and criminals, so both sides. And today I will show you some elements of how criminals hack into things and what you don't see in the back end. My team's been fantastic because they managed to emulate what hackers do. So you better see that live today. I have some slides as well, but depends, we might not need to go through them. But what I want you to get out of today is you don't need a massive budget. You just need a bit of common sense and the ability to read a document, very short one, which we created later on, and you can help yourself and the organizations you work for to protect yourself, right? I'm here usually 24/7, unfortunately. So if you got my contact details, you'll see them later on. You can contact me, phone me, email me, any advice you need. I'm available. And sometimes I charge, but most of the time, no, because I don't want you to be hacked. Simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi there. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Arati. I work with QBE. I run the financial lines and liability portfolio for QBE across Asia. Based here in Singapore, and very, very happy to see you all out here, and hello to everyone online as well. I will talk to you a little bit about cyber insurance after you've heard the war stories and the really cool and exciting stuff from Manish. And once you've done all the things that he will guide you and advise you to do in order to protect yourselves from a cyber attack, if you still get infiltrated, fear not, there is still cyber insurance that is there to protect you. And that's what I will talk about.
That's great. So I feel like we've got most bases covered, but I will just sort of bring you back. There are the questions there. So do use Pigeonhole if you do have any questions for us. So to have a data breach, you need to have some data, right? And most of this is online, as we know. In fact, if we go back through history, right from the creation of ancient scrolls, all the way through to the printing press and into the modern digital era, studies have shown that actually 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. Okay, 50% of that was on TikTok. That's not right. That's not entirely true. But 50% of the internet traffic is a video. If you think about that for a moment and what it means for the amount of information, it is quite remarkable. So, given the amount of data being collected and shared, understanding the legal landscape is absolutely vital. So, Pippa, as a partner that specializes in dealing with cyber incidents, what sort of obligations do companies, including charities, have?
Sure. So I think it's first important to, which I've put on the slide here, understand what is personal data, because that is sort of the starting point of everything. So basically, it is data which can either by itself or in combination with other material identify an individual. So charities actually have the same obligations as every other organization in Singapore in relation to the holding of data, however it is that the charity has come by that data. So these are mainly the slides I was referring to that are quite information heavy, and I won't go through all of them, but there are sort of 8 key obligations that are set out under the Personal Data Protection Act, which is the legislation that governs the use and collection, etc., of data in Singapore. So the first one is that you must have a DPO, a data protection officer, and that is a requirement for every single organization that is collecting data. You also must have a data protection policy in place. Moving through them, you have to obtain the consent of people in order to collect their data. You also can only collect or use data for a particularized purpose. Sorry, I've just got a few hats on here. The next is the notification obligation. So you must notify people of the purpose of the collection of their data. You also have to give people an ability to access and correct their data in the event that it has been collected incorrectly. You also have to the data that you hold about people has to be accurate, and this also comes back to the obligation to let people access their data and update it if necessary. I've put a little star next to the protection obligation because this is basically the most important of all of the obligations in my view anyway, and this is the one that leads to it can lead to real issues. So this arises by way of 2 sets of legislation in Singapore, both under the Charities Act itself as well as the Personal Data Protection Act. So every entity is under an obligation to protect the personal data in its control, and you have to use your take reasonable steps in order to protect that personal data, and it is effectively the breach of this obligation that then, and which I'll move on to, which then leads to requirements to notify regulators, etc., if you have been unable through a cyber attack to protect that data. Another important one, I think, for entities, particularly in this region, I understand that most of you here today in person and online are associated with charities that are based in Singapore, but if you are transferring data overseas for any reason, there is a transfer limitation obligation, and that provides that you are only allowed to transfer data effectively to other countries that have obligations or frameworks in place that are very similar to Singapore. So you're not allowed to transfer data if you're transferring it to a country that is less stringent than Singapore. And then the data breach notification obligation is the last one, and this is the one that I deal with all the time. So if there has been a cyber incident, then the organisation is required to notify the PDPC, which is the Personal Data Protection Commission, and we will move on to that in due course. The next important point is data intermediaries. So it might be that your organization collects data and you then want to outsource this. You want to outsource the processing, etc., of that data. But it's very important to remember that if you outsource that, you still maintain control and responsibility for that data. So whoever you outsource it to, you have to make sure that effectively they're going to do as good of a job as you will, and you still maintain all of your own obligations and responsibilities over that. The next slide here is just in relation to the rules for the collection and use and disclosure of data. Effectively, I mean, I think it's largely common sense in that you have to obtain people's consent before you are allowed to collect their data. There are certain categories of data that you don't need to obtain consent for, but I'm not sure people largely use those. They're mainly related to national security and things like that. So they're not really everyday uses that you would be collecting people's data for in any event. It's important also to understand that people's consent can be withdrawn. So if people do say, okay, I want you to stop using my data, then the organization is under an obligation to ensure that actually that data is deleted and is not used any longer. And there was recently a case in Singapore that dealt with this, and we can move on to that in due course. So that is sort of the legislative framework that we're operating under, and what it is that you are allowed to do with people's data and the obligations that every entity has if you are going to be collecting, using, dealing with data.
So there's quite a lot there, right? Isn't it?
Yes.
There's a lot of things to consider, but something that's always on our minds when we think about, data is not just the data itself. It's also when we have a cyber attack. So what exactly is a cyber attack? So
as I've said on the slide here, it's what it sounds like. It is an attempt by, or sometimes it succeeds, a cyber criminal to illegally or unlawfully enter into a system, a computer system. So the most common types of attacks that I deal with, and I'm sure Manish has probably a lot more to say about this than I do, but they are malware, which is effectively any type of software that a cyber criminal illegally puts onto your system. And do not ask me how they do this. This is definitely not my in my wheelhouse, but it can involve sort of spyware, so that they look at every single keystroke on your computer, for example. It can also involve ransomware, which is obviously where the type of malware that we hear about the most, in that it will effectively freeze your whole system. A little note will pop up and it will say, pay us a certain amount for us to be able to decrypt your system so that you have access to the system again. The other two types of cyber attacks, and there's a little bit of discussion about whether these are attacks or not, because they're not necessarily sort of brute intrusions into the system, but there certainly are things that can create a lot of problems in any event. Phishing and spoofing, and they're quite similar. Phishing is really where someone pretends to be someone in order to obtain your details. So it might be that you receive an email from what looks like your bank to say, please, we're about to suspend your account, please click here, and it will then take you to a website. You put in your account details and that's all fraudulent. Spoofing, on the other hand, is where, for example, you might receive an email and it looks very similar to an email that you receive all the time. So for whatever reason at Kennedy's, there's been a number of attempts that come from the partner that I work for, and it will be his email address, but his 2 letters of his name swapped around. So the cyber criminal has obviously gone onto our website, said, okay, Julian Wallace is the partner here. He'll send his employee an email and ask her to do something. So then they've set up an email address that looks very similar to his, but is not quite his. And so you have to be careful about the information that you might then send to those people. Often they will attach a fraudulent invoice or things like that for you to then go ahead and make payment to them. So they're the sort of 3 types of attacks that, as I say, I deal with on a regular basis.
Wow. And so if a charity happened to, what would they have to do if they experienced a cyber attack?
Sure. So the main thing is that you have, after you are aware of the fact that you have fallen victim to a cyber attack, you then have 30 days in which you must assess whether the cyber attack requires you to report to the PDPC, the Personal Data Protection Commission. Now, there are 2 reasons why you might report, or 3 reasons really why you might report. Firstly, if the information that might have been released or accessed relates to, could cause significant harm to an individual if that information was published or accessed or leaked onto the dark web, etc. So there are some prescribed categories of significant harm, and that will be somebody's name or, for example, their NRIC number plus various types of information. So it might be their financial information, it might be their medical records. There are other types of information as well, such as adoption records, criminal histories, etc. So if it's someone's name or their NRIC in conjunction with other types of data, you have to report that. Equally, if the incident is has affected more than 500 people, and that is not just 500 people in Singapore, that is also globally, then that is also an incident that is required to be reported. Sometimes you can lodge a voluntary notification, and people might do that, mainly for a PR purpose, frankly, just to be able to say we are working with the authorities and we're doing our best here. But that is not required unless either of those 2 categories are met. And once it is determined that you have a notifiable data breach, you must notify the PDPC within 3 days, and they're very strict about that. If you don't do it, then they will ask you why you haven't done it. So it's very important, as soon as it's clear that there has been a notifiable breach, that the PDPC is informed straight away.
So are there any sort of examples you could give us of cyber incidents that charities have been involved in, maybe globally?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of 2 schools of thought about cyber attacks on charities. I think, firstly, people think, well, that's just wrong to attack a charity because they're trying to do the right thing. They're doing their best. They're often underfunded, under-resourced, etc. So you must be a really terrible type of person to go ahead and attack a charity. But equally, charities do, whether you realize it or not, hold a significant amount of very sensitive information, and that information can be quite valuable. So I've put on this slide here a couple of different types of charities around the world that have been affected. So, there's the types of information that these charities hold is really what is the items of value. So, for example, Planned Parenthood in America, that relates to abortion, sexually transmitted diseases, etc. So that sort of information is very sensitive, particularly in some states in America. And so the attacks on these various entities have been widespread and have caused some significant damage. Equally, the attack on the Save the Children, that was in the UK, that related to an enormous amount of data, which was both in relation to their clientele as well as employee information. The other important thing to note, which is particularly in relation to the Australian charities, is the release of donor information. So oftentimes donations are made and donors would prefer to remain anonymous, but if the entities are attacked and this information is released, and again, that is another type of sensitive information that can be that would then be out there.
So if we move a bit closer to home, have we seen any incidents of charities being attacked in Singapore?
Yes, so the PDPC, after it completes its investigation, it will then publish if it has decided to fine an organization, or if it has decided to enter into an undertaking with an organization, it will publish this on its website. So I've put 4 slides here of recent decisions where the PDPC has actually fined charities in Singapore. I won't go through them all because they're sort of quite fact heavy, but the fines have ranged from a few $1,000s to, as you can see here for the Poor Taekwondo Foundation, $30,000. So that is, you know, a very significant fine, particularly when you look at the range of fines that it issued. It is certainly on the higher end, and the PDPC has made it clear throughout their decisions that just because you are a charity, you won't get any charity from them. Basically, they have said that charities still have the same obligations as everybody else to keep the data secure. And, you know, my view is that in some instances, it might be that they're harder on charities because of the types of information and the sensitivity of that information. And they really want to send a message, which is you need to make sure that the data that you hold is secure. And if you don't do that, then you will be fined. So, as I say, I won't go through all of them, but there's been sort of various types of incidents. What is interesting is that there is one incident that was the subject of a PDPC decision, which was not as a result of an attack. It was effectively just an email that was sent out incorrectly, which exposed it was the credit counseling service of Singapore, and it was sent out, and it inadvertently included a number of names and emails of people. And they also received a fine because they hadn't properly protected the information, and they received a fine of $10,000. So I guess the point there is it's not just if you are attacked, you still have to be careful about what it is that you're doing with the data that you have, because the data that you have is still very important.
Absolutely. I think there is a lot of human error that we do see in these sort of cyber attacks, and you know,
definitely.
sending just as simple as sending out the wrong email can lead to like quite bad consequences. So what specific, the kinds of penalties charities face? We sort of covered some financial ones. What are we looking at after a cyber incident?
So it really depends on the facts and circumstances of each case. And it will depend on, you know, exactly what we just said, whether it is an attack on you, or whether it is the organization's carelessness, or whether it is the fact that although the organization was attacked, it had really made no attempts to ensure that it was meeting its protection obligations to keep information secure. So the fines can vary, but I would say that anecdotally, over the last couple of years, the fines do seem to be increasing, and that kind of fits, in my view, with the when the PDPA was first introduced. I think that there was a little bit of a ramp up period, and the PDPC sort of gave everyone an opportunity to get used to it and to see what the obligations would be. Now they're at a point where it's been enforced for a couple of years, and I think they've really formed the view, okay, we're going to get tough now. We're going to crack down, and fines, in my view, certainly are increasing. And so although the fines are not necessarily the maximum penalty for the fines has increased recently, so that the maximum penalty is now $1 million. There hasn't been a fine that's anywhere near that, but the fines themselves are getting more substantial. The other thing that the PDPC has recently introduced is a process called undertakings. And these are not an admission of guilt. You do not have to say, yes, we accept that we have done the wrong thing here, or that our systems weren't up to scratch, etc. But they do sort of allow an organization to circumvent the investigation process. So you don't have to go through the whole investigation with the PDPC. You sign up to an undertaking, and it's more of an opportunity for an organization to say, these are the areas that we need to fix. We will go ahead and do that. The PDPC will then give that organization a year to do that usually, but then they will check back in with you. So it's not a matter of just saying, sure, we'll do all this. You then actually have to do it. And they will come back around and they will check up. And there have been instances where they have checked up and the company hasn't done that. And then they've said, okay, the undertaking's over. Now we're going to commence the investigation. And there is one example that I found of a charity signing up to an undertaking that was following a cyber attack. They then realized that some of their systems needed improving, so they entered into a remediation plan or agreement basically with the PDPC, and then the undertaking went for the year and then was signed off by the PDPC at the finalization of that.
And so we've sort of seen that there's fines available for companies, businesses, charities that get it wrong, but there's what sort of the people who are affected, what sort of compensation is there out there for a victim of cyber?
Sure. So in Singapore, it's quite curious when you compare it to other jurisdictions around the world, I think anyway, because in America, everyone knows America's very litigious. Australia is certainly becoming more and more leaning that way. And in Singapore, although there is actually a right under the PDPA to bring civil proceedings for a breach of the Data Protection Act, there's only been one instance where somebody has done that, and actually they didn't even seek any financial compensation. All they wanted was just an injunction so that their data would stop being used. So I do think that the mentality in Singapore generally is quite different. It does seem to me that affected people in Singapore are happy for the organization to be dealt with, for the organization itself to be dealt with, i.e. fined, enter into a remediation program, etc. But they're not necessarily so concerned with their own compensation for the loss or the release of their data. And I guess it will be interesting to see whether that mindset changes as everywhere around the world, and particularly around the region, becomes a bit more litigious too.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump into some questions because I have been looking at the questions that have been coming in.
Sure.
So one of the questions is, do you have any examples in Southeast Asia of sort of similar requirements under legislation in different countries to those in Singapore? Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the countries around this region are bringing themselves into line with the GDPR, which is the privacy legislation in the UK and Europe. So they have a lot of similar obligations in terms of access to your data, the requirement to appoint a DPO, etc. Also notifying of cyber incidents. Some countries in this region still haven't introduced such stringent legislation. For example, Malaysia has had it tabled for I think about 2 years or so now, and still hasn't actually come into effect. But certainly there is a big push. For example, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, they're all starting to move towards what I would refer to as the GDPR model. So I think that there is certainly a focus around the region on, okay, data is valuable. We have to make sure that entities are properly dealing with it.
That's great. Thank you. One other question is quite specific, but have you seen any cases of data breaches for religious charities?
Not personally. I do know that the charity that was involved in the undertaking, which is the Thai Hua Kwan Moral Charities, they do have some religious affiliation, but I'm not certain that it was, you know, a particular charity set up in respect of, you know, Christianity or something like that. I haven't seen any particular charity. I know that there was a cyber incident involving the Red Cross. Yep. So I'm sure that they do exist, and I'm sure that there are probably some charities that have been attacked purely because they have a religious affiliation, and that would be because the attackers, I presume, are of the opposite or hold the opposite viewpoints. But I personally haven't been involved in one.
Sorry, I've seen a few, majority being Christian, but I don't think it was linked to them being Christian. It was very much linked to the data they stored and had on individuals, and they were quite large charities.
The attacks on Planned Parenthood in America, I remember when I was researching for this presentation, there was a suggestion that some of those attacks were because effectively the opposite of Christianity, because they are about sexual health and sexual freedom and abortions, etc., which particularly in America is the opposite of some of the more conservative Christians. But I'm not sure that there was a particular ransomware group that was associated with that or claimed responsibility for those. No,
but I suppose you see it in sort of a political landscape where you've got political actors who will make systemic attacks on sort of other countries. So it's by sort of extrapolating that it wouldn't be in the realms of impossibility that someone who had opposing views, be them political, religious, or whatever, would actually target someone.
Certainly, exactly.
So maybe finally, Pippa, is there anything we can do to prepare for a cyber incident?
Yes. So from a legal perspective, and I will leave exactly what you can do on your systems, etc., to Manish. I won't delve into that. But from a legal perspective, the things that I would recommend are first to make sure that you have complied with all of your obligations. So you have a DPO, you have data policies in place, etc. You have proper consent forms so that you can easily show that people have in fact provided their consent for you to give them their information. The other thing I would suggest as well is to review any contracts that you might have that have an obligation in those contracts to notify, for example, your vendors or your clients if you have been the subject of a cyber incident, because we see often that it's not just a requirement to notify the PDPC or affected individuals, but actually there are some contractual obligations too. And the last point that I would make is understand where sensitive information is held. And the reason why I say that is because, as I said, once you are aware that you have been the subject of a cyber incident and it is likely to involve sensitive information, you only have 3 days. And that goes by very, very quickly by the time you engage lawyers, engage someone like Manish, etc. So if you are able to quickly say, we know that this server or this tower, etc., was attacked, but we are 100% certain that that server does not contain personal information, then you can breathe a little bit easier while you investigate the rest of the incident. But if you know that a server has been attacked that does contain sensitive information, straight away you can say, okay, now we need lawyers, we need to engage with the PDPC, etc. We may also need to engage with regulators worldwide. So I think that understanding exactly how your systems are set up and where data is stored is quite important.
Thank you very much, Pippa. So, I mean, that's given us a really good understanding of the law, the obligations we see around it, and how they're imposed on us. But getting into something a bit more practical now, okay? So imagine you're a charity, you suffer a cyber attack. Actually, we don't have to imagine, do we, Manish? Because I believe you've got, and you and a team have given us a live example, which we can now look at, and
Sure.
you can talk us through it.
Yeah, bear with me. Let me just get it ready.
The suspense. I promise you it's worth it.
Brilliant. So my I always wanted to show people what really happens, because unless you're the victim or in an organization where you see it live, you don't know. And we always talk about these things. So what I have today are two demos. You're going to see a normal system, and in that system, you're going to see it be attacked, right? And some of you might have seen this before or witnessed it yourself in your organizations, but you're going to see this attack. The second video is actually a side-by-side. It's my team who actually do the attack. And you can see every movement they make, what they type, what they do, and why they do it. So you can see both sides. That'll be a split screen. So first, I'm just going to talk through a normal system. So this system, I'm going to play it through. And I'm actually doing a voiceover, and I haven't formally done it, but I've been told by our team I got to do it properly later on. But you can see from here, it's just a system. So what we do, we're just going to open up different documents. So you can see everything's live. You know, got a PDF here opened up, and it's supposed to do what it says on the tin. So it's just a Windows 11 system, and they're just going through some documents, right? And we'll go through a few more, just because I want to really show you that there's real documents and it's a real system, right? So there's just a spreadsheet here, so you can see what's going on. I mean, one of the cases we have is when people say they get attacked, they don't know, well, or they presume they get attacked because they got something of value. And so they don't realize that actually what that might be everything they have, all documentation. So, you know, PDFs, we just opened up, Excel spreadsheet, and now we're going to open a PowerPoint, right? This is just an example of a PowerPoint on Papyrus, which is really interesting. Maybe not too much, but yeah, so it's just showing you that this is a live system. It's a normal thing people use. So you got PPT here, you got Excel spreadsheet, you got a PDF documentation, and now we'll open a Word document. And why we've opened these documents is because to show you that these are the most common ones which seem to be attacked. some brief history about ransomware. The ransomware has become quite sophisticated because of two reasons. One, whoever coded it when they first started deemed that they should only code it to attack documentation or files which are non-system. So what this means is that your system still runs, but you can't use any of the data you ever had. So your documents, PDFs, Excel spreadsheet, all of these. In fact, there's about 200 different file formats ransomware encrypts. And the second part, which made it very popular, is a way of extorting money and using the Bitcoin channels to move money around, right? Because a majority of the time it's untraceable. Right? So anyway, I think we've gone to town here to show you that this system's a live system. It has all the documentation and things there. Arati sent us an email, as you can see here. So obviously it's from Arati, so we have to open this email. Unfortunately, the document she sent us, there's nothing in there, which is really odd. Anyway, maybe we'll go back to Arati and ask her to send the email again. Who knows? But anyway, this is what we're seeing. So there's obviously something wrong with this document. We'll just close it up and carry on to the next thing. As you can see, nothing happens. It's an empty document. So we just type in question marks. Just to protect Arati. Arati did not send us the email, but we had to use somebody popular. So we just sending an email back to Arati saying, hey, right, there's something not right. You just saw a flash up on the screen. So, oops. So that's how quick your system could be encrypted. Now, there's that magic note screen Pippa was talking about. So now I have 2 days and 23 hours and counting to make either a form of payment, otherwise the data will be lost, or I have to make a payment to get my data back, right? So what you're seeing here is actually that email contained a ransomware attack. It didn't look like a ransomware attack because it didn't look like anything, but you don't know that. And this is how sophisticated the attack can be. In the next video, very soon, I'm going to show you what was happening in the back end. But this is a very famous attack. It's a WannaCry ransomware attack. And what we're going to do now is just some of the files we opened before, we're just going to try to open them. Unfortunately, we can't open any of them because guess what? They became encrypted, right? And this is how I wanted to show what happens. This is a user view, a normal system. It could be a simple email containing a Word document or any other document or even just a link, and that's it, you're in trouble. If you can see very closely here, this is a WannaCry. It encrypts all the files. It changes the name of the file. So you now know you're encrypted. Very sad, but it happens all the time. And WannaCry has been one of the biggest ransomware attacks globally. Fortunately, if your antivirus system is up to date, it should prevent that kind of attack. But we are still seeing these type of attacks happening. Any questions, sir, before I move on to the next video? Great, okay. Right. Okay, so this video, now you're going to see a side by side. So you know the screen on the right-hand side. I just showed that whole video. The screen on the left-hand side is my lovely team hacking into the system. So they created the scripts, they created everything, and they are now ready to attack a system. So you can see they actually use very specific commands, and I'll go through some of them and not too much detail because it's not the right time for you to go through the absolute detail of how the hackers hack a system. But to make it easy for you, they're using a system called Kali Linux. You can download this, but it's used in two ways. That system can be used for good, and it can also use for bad, right? So it's a testing system for ethical hacking, but also could be used for hacking. And in this instance, my team is showing why they're doing what they're doing. So they sent a listener. So that listener was part of the email sent by Arati, right? So that was the email. There's a listener in there, and it will keep on running and listens, right? So the payload, in this instance, we were talking about malware. So Pippa mentioned some of the biggest attacks are malware. This payload is the malware, right? And it's as simple as a script. And this is a script which is run and it's embedded in the Word document. That's how it's actually worked. So you might have seen macros in Word documents or in Excel. This is how they've run it. They've embedded a macro in the Word document. You can't see it. It looks empty. But once that macro once you open that Word document, that script gets executed. The listener goes back, and from the script, you can see on the left-hand side, what it was doing, it went off to the internet and downloaded the payload, which was a virus, which is the WannaCry virus. Now, when we saw it, it was pretty fast how it was encrypted, but there was a bit of time there. And it was fast because there weren't that many documents. But you can imagine if you got tens of thousands of documents, it would take a bit of time, but that script will run very quickly and start encrypting files. So you can just see side by side how sophisticated or how quickly hackers can attack a system. And it's not complicated for them to create this and send it out. I'll be honest with you, to be frank, if I get that Word document, I truly sent it out to Arati or anybody in this room, you would be impacted. The only problem we have is we can't reverse engineer. So that WannaCry ransomware has a decryption key, which we don't own or have. So we can do the damage, but we can't reverse the engineering on this decryption or encryption, sorry. So you can see side by side what's just happened, right? And I wanted you to see that because it's never shown anywhere. You won't see it anywhere. This is how it's done, right? Don't get me wrong. The hackers aren't there doing it live. They wrote the script, they wrote the listener, they create it once and send it out to thousands of companies, people, and so forth. Is there any questions on that?
No, I think the incredibly scary thing is they send it out to thousands of people and they only need to get lucky once, right?
Yes, and they didn't even send it out. They use bots now. So I don't know sure if you understand what a bot is. A bot is an application or a system which sits on millions, if not tens and hundreds of millions of systems, and they don't do anything. And there's a whole sub-war going on ownership on bots. So the more bots you own, the more you can charge any individuals who want to deploy this kind of technology to make money, right? So it becomes like a service to make money. So these bots out there, and then people go, right, criminals say, oh, actually, you know what? I want to infect everybody in Asia who's financial institutions. Great. They'll go to these guys and say, right, okay, do you own bots who can do this? They go, yeah, we do. Right, okay, how much are you going to charge me? And they'll give them a fee. They pay the money in Bitcoin, and now they own them bots. They'll release this script to the bots, and the bots go and do their business. Like you said, only takes one, right? And they're making money already. Arati later on will talk about how much money is made and transferred in ransomware fees and the cost of it globally, and it is terrifyingly large numbers.
Definitely worrying. So I think this ties into one of the questions we've actually been asked through the pigeonhole. So practically, what can we do to stop this? So the actual question that was asked was, if we experience a cyber attack, who should do the assessment, internal, external? What happens if we don't have qualified personnel to do an assessment? Which sort of links back to what practically can we do here?
Okay, so if you had the attack, let's talk about if you had the attack, right? Because it's hindsight's brilliant, but it's too late. Once you've had the attack, there's two things. If you know you have personal data, I think best you start talking to your lawyer very quickly, because you need to make the a breach notification to PDPC, and Pippa was talking about that. You just got to do that, and you have to speak to your lawyers very quickly. The next stage of that is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit controversial here because I can. If your IT department was that good, then you wouldn't be in that problem. So go external, go out, because I'll give you an example. If I got attacked, my organization got attacked, we would not fix it. We would have to go out because it's too personal to us. And this is the same like when you go to doctors, right? You don't get a surgeon operating on his family or on himself or herself, right? They go to another expert. And that's my advice. Go to another expert to help you. They'll have the most efficient way of getting the information you require. If it's a breach, you need to have a forensic element involved. That means that you really need to know how it happened so you can plug the holes and show that it was a breach and you were hacked. You can have fabulous security in place. And that does help you, because if you did have fabulous security and the breach shows that it doesn't matter who you were, a bank, a government organization, you're still going to get a breach. There's going to be a lot more leniency involved from the PDPC. But in this instance, you go outside, it's always the best. But unfortunately, there's a cost to this. And hence, we always say, and I'm in this boat as well, and we have this. So I'm a cyber company, right? But we have cyber insurance. How weird is that, right? You're kind of thinking, wait a minute, you should know best. Of course, we have super levels of control, but nothing is 100%. Hence, we need insurance to help us. So we can show all the controls we have in place, but nothing is 100%. So hence, even we have cyber insurance.
Yeah, and that feeds into another question that's been asked here, actually, which is, can you talk about how the state-of-the-art security system at MGM Vegas was compromised, or how come iOS can be attacked? It's to your point, right? There's always a way to get in.
There's always a way. Nothing is 100%. Actually, MGM. Okay, so the MGM systems are state-of-the-art, but there's always a flaw, right? And from what I know of their systems or any other state-of-the-art systems, you got to think differently. So one of the things I've always learned, and this goes back to the 1990s, when I first came to cyber, I actually went on a course, and we were sitting in a room on day one of a course, like you do have a bit of coffee or tea before you start the course off. And the individual training was a gentleman called Max Redwine. So when I looked Max Redwine up, he was actually on the FBI wanted list. So you kind of look at yourself and go, oh, shoot. So this guy's wanted. But he was phenomenal because his thinking was totally different. He said, hackers do not think like the normal person on the street. They don't care for that. They don't care for your process, procedures, technology controls you put in place. They're not interested. They just find any which way. And yes, they will read every manual and the last pages to work out how to thwart a system or how to abuse a system. Even a security system can be abused, right? So these are the kind of things they do. And that thinking is totally different. And now, because of money, wow, there's a different whole gameplay going on now.
Yeah, and they're either utilized by certain companies. They actually employ them they employ hackers to find holes in their system, right? So it's sort of, it's coming both ways. They paid very, very good money to do it. So it's sort of
we have a Crest team, which basically has got some ethical hackers in our team. We also allow them to do bug bounties. So they listed on Google and Microsoft top 10 to find these bugs, because Microsoft and Google pay money for these bugs, which could be vulnerabilities, right? So it's a good thing, but yeah, there's a different way of thinking about how to, and the problem with technology is it keeps on changing. So whatever you thought was really good and new today, tomorrow it becomes old and there's a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities are weird because you actually, no system is made with vulnerabilities. It's day one when somebody finds a vulnerability, then it says there's a vulnerability. So most systems are clean, secure, but as soon as a vulnerability is found, that's it, it's vulnerable, right? And then it gets exploited.
Yeah, there's a recent one with Log4j, wasn't there? That was quite a big,
that was still there because a lot of people haven't updated it or fixed that issue. Yeah,
and it's the same for me. Sometimes I wake up in the morning, I go to look at my phone to see what emails I've got come through, and they said, sorry, you can't access your emails because you haven't updated your iOS operating system, which is right? And then that's because they found a vulnerability. They want to plug that gap.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, let's be, iOS from Apple, and then you got Microsoft as well. These are so popular, right, and Android, that they need to be updated on a regular basis. They keep on updating their features because all of us require that. We want new things, and therefore these new things sometimes aren't fully tested securely.
So next on to, would you like to go on? Would you like to carry on?
Well, I got the presentation up there.
Maybe actually no. I think it's right. Spend a bit more of the practical stuff.
Okay, this one is this presentation is how you actually would, there's some data points of what things we see in the marketplace, and Pippa touched on some of them, right? So there's the personal data leakage, and there's ransomware attacks, and so, and every year this seems to be increasing, and Artie's got some really amazing data to show you later on. Sorry, can you go into the next slide, please? Oh, do you have a clicker? Yay. All right, yeah, and these are some of the reasons people use a majority of time, and it's a shame, right? And one of the things later on, we're releasing a ransomware survival guide. And me and Artie were just talking about that before we started today, that everybody comes out with excuses, right? They really do that. They haven't done this, they haven't done that. Now, I'll make it very simple for you. It's going to cost you not a lot, and it's not going to be tremendously difficult to do. But if you back up all your systems, so I'll explain. We were approached by an insurance company, and they said, what is the single one thing any organization can do to protect themselves? And that is backup. And there's a strategy called 3-2-1-1, and it's in our paper. What that basically means is when you make a backup, you make 3 backups. One is going to be online. The second, if not the most important, is offline. If you keep an offline backup, doesn't matter how many times you get attacked in a day, you can always restore yourself, right? That's it. You will still be attacked, but you can restore yourself. And that's the key. That's the most simple thing. Of course, we've got a lot more things we can tell you to do, but they take time, a bit of money, and so forth. But the most single thing is having a backup, right? And why I say this, because a lot of these criminals right now, you just saw the ransomware attack, and Pippa's aware of this, that there's a variation of this is called double extortion. So I'll be the criminal. This is what I do. I will break in, and you just saw the break-in over there on the demo. But before I encrypt the data, I will steal it. Once I steal the data, then I will encrypt your data, right? So what happens now, I'll leave a note and say, hey, I've encrypted your data, and then I've stolen it. So you're like, oh, shoot. Now give me some money, or I'll release your data to the world, number one. Number two, give me more money, then I can give you the key to decrypt your own data. So this is called a double extortion. This is the very most popular thing which is happening right now. So that's the way the ransomware is working. Now, if you have a backup, you can recover your own system, so you don't need to pay the second ransom. But the first ransom, you're going to might have to pay, because you don't want them to release that data to the public, right? And they do so, right? So these are the kind of things. So again, there's lots of excuses out there, and I'm not saying this is not about charities having excuses. I have seen every type of organization, from the largest billion-dollar revenue organizations down to the smallest. These excuses keep on coming, and it's a shame that it happens, but it's there, and it shouldn't be an excuse, because they're efficient ways of securing your system.
Can I just ask on that? There's a question coming in, sort of, if you don't have an IT department, right?
Yeah.
These are still things you can put in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A little bit of know-how. There's also going to be somebody who can help, right? You can come to us. We'll give you free advice and show you where to go. There's lots of things which are free.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just a framework. So we follow this framework it's a NIST framework. When there's attack, so it's the preparation, detection, containment, eradication, recovery. The middle three are super important because once there's a ransomware attack or any malware attack or any type of attack, you want to detect it. Once you know where it is, you want to contain it so it doesn't spread. And the eradication is remove it from your business. So then you can recover and then fortify your systems. Yeah. So I'm going to go really quickly through this. I don't want to, and we'll share the slides out. No, not a problem. So there's lots of things on this response management as well. So like you've asked the question already, who do you go to or speak to? One of the key things, depending on your size, and if you're a popular charity, which many of you are, then you might need to get some kind of counseling involved, especially some PR company to help you. And I have seen in many cases, a breach can be spinned in a nice way, right? and it can be more positive. But yeah, you'll need something like that in place. Unfortunately, or maybe I should say fortunate for me and my team, digital forensics. So this is always in play. So imagine let's look like it as a criminal activity, as a murder scene or a bank robbery. We do the same, but it's digital, right? So you normally call the police, they come along, oh dear, you've been robbed. Okay, they corner the area off and take all the evidence and fingerprints and check what's out. We do the same, but it's all digital. And one of the ways we do it, we take image copies. Because it's digital, we're allowed to take a copy of something which is identical to the original. The original might get rewritten, destroyed, or whatever, but we take a digital copy and we analyze the digital copy. So we have some very sophisticated software and humans who work on that to analyze data from the forensics point of view. Once we work out what's happened, we work with the lawyers and the authorities to help fix things or show the full story, what's happened. Okay, again, this is a well-known MITRE attack. So a MITRE attack basically says if you follow this sequence, there's a possibility to stop the attack depending on where it is on that chain. So it becomes like a kill chain. And this is just a timeline of an attack which happened. And be frank with you, like people just mentioned, time goes really quickly. You're being attacked 1 minute, next minute you're gonna dig deep because you got to survive as an organization. And I hope all of you can do a little bit of analysis. There's two things you really need to learn and do. One, what data do you truly store and do you need to store it? And if something goes wrong, how long can you survive as a charity? Because if it goes beyond the 2 weeks, you might not exist, right? So you have to look at all these things. Going back to the data, if you have no data, then you don't need to worry. I'll make that a bit more clearer because that sounds wrong. You think we've got personal data. Have you heard of any case, you can go online now, of any company who has been fined when they encrypted their data? No, because what happens is the PDPC will tell you to go away politely. They're not interested because the encrypted data isn't data. Nobody can do anything with it. Magical, right? So you can have a lot of data if you encrypt it. It's a magical world. I know it sounds complicated, but it's not. But if you have to have the data and you encrypt that data, it's brilliant. Because even when the hackers get hold of it, it has no value to them. Right? It's a win-win. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind. Again, some timelines instances. I'm gonna quickly go. Okay, this is kind of ransomware response, and we've kind of talked about what you do. And the ransomware response is slightly different because there's a lot of loss of data and there might be a double extortion. So we have to follow a process slightly different. I was talking earlier about negotiation. So as a firm and myself, there's not many of us who actually negotiate with threat actors. So I do that for a living, which is very strange because not everybody wants to talk to criminals, and there's a very specific way of doing it and what you say to them, how you say it. But yeah, I negotiate with criminals on a regular basis, and it's very entertaining to one degree, but also very sad that at the end of the day, I'm paying criminals money to recover data. Again, some more stats and process of doing more things. Let me quickly go through this. There's loads of. We'll share these. These are very helpful if you look in the detail what you need to do. Your response plans. Ideally, there's a stage, and this stage is perfect right now because hopefully none of you have been attacked. If you prepare now, and usually it's incident response plan is what you really need. But if you do a couple of things like we said, one of them is understanding what data you have. Number 2, encrypt it. Number 3, back up all your data. These kind of things will help you so much. Really will do. All of them things don't cost a lot of money. They really don't. I'm happy to share with you free resources, things you can use to encrypt your data, protect your data, have an incident response policy. Yeah, these are all things which are available. It's just a little bit effort of doing it. Yeah. Sorry, too much. I should have cut my slides down, right?
I really like the detail.
Yeah, the last one, all the main points you need to follow. I'll let you read it off there. We're going to release a ransomware survival guide later on today. You're more than happy to download it and go through that. But that guide is intrinsic to survival. These are very similar points, what you need to do. And the next part is, yes, ask me anything. Well, nearly anything. I'm not sure if you've got any more questions for me.
So how do we know if there's an email's been compromised? So how do you know? It's very difficult, right?
Yeah, so Pippa was talking about emails which get phishing attacks and spoof attacks, right? Okay, so I'm going to tell you some secrets. I don't own any of these companies because if I did, then I'd be super rich and whatever. But okay, 2 things. Pieces of data. The company or the email system most compromised is Microsoft Office 365. Probably going to get Bill Gates come along or Satya Nadella coming over and beat me up or something, right? But no, they get phishing attacks and compromised the most, right? Maybe because they're most popular, but definitely get most attacks. There are settings you can put into the system. Now, unfortunately, you would have to be on an enterprise level product, and it's E3 to E5 to enable you to have these facilities. That's a shame, right? Because unless you've got a large organization, you might not have that enterprise level. But phishing attacks are all about looking at the email themselves and saying, do I trust the email? Did I hover over the email address? Did it come from the right people? And if you do have an IT department, forward it to them because you're unsure. Can't go wrong for 2 people to see that email to work out whether or not it's there. Now, I'm going to let you in another secret. We use Microsoft Office 365, but we don't use the email. So we always get asked that question. Why? Because we know it's flawed. But we use Google for work. And I know some history, which you probably won't know of, and you can look it up. Well, I've been in security a long time, and I used to work with a company called Postini many, many years ago. And Postini's claim to fame was they used to create these massive devices which could send out 100,000 emails a second. And they had amazing spam filters. And these are many years ago. Like every great company, Google came along and said, thank you very much, we'll buy you. And guess what? Postini disappeared. Why? Because Postini now is embedded in Google Mail. Therefore, if you notice any of you have Google Mail, it's very sophisticated and it will protect you from majority of spam. We as an organization should be hit all the time. I get an opportunity to see all the hits, but I never get it in my inbox. So I know it happens. It's all spammed away. So I can get on my day job, right? And so can the rest of the company. So Google has maybe it should buy shares in Google, has better spam engine than most others out there. So that's one way to protect yourself. There are other technologies out there which can do that, but they're all flawed to a certain degree. A lot of this is about humans looking at the email, seeing if they trust it or not.
And can I just add one thing on that point, which is that if you're if part of your internal policies is designed to protect yourself. So if you say to your employees, you need to make sure that you check the origin of emails, or before you make a payment, you should call the person who has sent you the invoice to double check the bank account details. Although that might be your policy, what is very important, particularly if you do have a breach, is that you have written that into your written policies, which are circulated to your employees, and you will, because the PDPC will ask you, they will say, well, how did this happen? If this is your policy, and then they will say to you, and then the organization says, well, all of our employees know about this, they're told this at training. And then the PDPC will say, okay, well, can you show us? And they will actually ask for you to show them the records of that people have attended training, that they know what they're supposed to be doing in relation to receiving and paying invoices, for example. So it is important that you make sure that you are keeping records of all of these things. Anytime you tell people how to deal with emails coming in or how to deal with invoicing, etc., please make sure that you put that in a policy and that you keep records of that, because if you are on the unfortunate subject of a cyber incident, this is all very useful information to give to the PDPC in mitigation of any action that they might take against you.
That's great.
No, so back on that point, some of the phishing attacks we've seen also, like where the invoices are sent. So we've seen a criminal activity, a company called Golden Galleons. And this was a Nigerian outfit, and what they were doing, they would only attack shipping companies, right? And they were very well versed in the language they use on the email, but they were, again, sophisticated on spoofing emails and intercepting certain things. Again, if you spend a bit of time and have training for your staff, this is great to stop people from doing that. And again, that most simplest process. Wait a minute, let me pick the phone up and see if that invoice is person who sent me the invoice is the person who sent it me, and the bank account details are correct, and you can save yourself a lot of money.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, 100%. So I think there are some more questions here, but I think in the interest of time, we might just also cover off the insurance, and if we have time at the end, we'll go back to it. So
Absolutely.
Arati, when I was sort of a bit more junior growing up, I remember an old insurance executive. He said to me, Joe, I don't like this cyber insurance. He goes, I'm a property guy. I know what I like, bricks and mortar. If you gave me a property that every day someone was trying to burn it down, it was in a cat zone, it was earthquake, there was flooding, and people were throwing Molotov cocktails at it, I would not insure that product. Yet with cyber insurance, we insure that, right? So why do we do it? And can you give us a bit more insight into it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting, right? And with property damage, I will just add on, you've got a broken window, you've got a broken floor, whatever it is, you can fix it. You've got your P&L can afford it, and you've got insurance that can support it. But with cyber, it's very interesting. And you've heard from Pippa and from Manish as well. Cyber can be the death of a company. You just may not recover from it. And so, yes, it is scary because we're always dealing with the unknown. Property insurance is quite sophisticated. We've got CAT models. It's been written for a long time. We've got tons of historical actuarial data, but cyber, we don't. But yes, we understand that companies are using technology a lot more than they used to. Business models have changed. The information on media, there's heightened information on media in relation to cyber incidents, and hackers and cyber criminals have just gotten a lot smarter over the years. I'd love to say that underwriters are smart, but I will admit that the hackers are smarter than us. But we just got to realize that this is the way business is run. And whilst you are responsible for your day-to-day operational risk, when something catastrophic happens, we understand that this is a catastrophic risk, and we want to be there to support you, to get you through a challenging time.
Yeah, that's great. And so charities, we've sort of touched on this already, but they're often, you think, oh, no one would hack a charity, but that's not the reality. Do you want to just touch on that again?
I think we've spoken a little bit about this, but one of the things that I would say is that there is a culture of trust. And it kind of goes back to the culture, right? You might have the best controls in place. You might have all the education, you know, the phishing emails that come through. We get them all the time as well. And, you know, you accidentally click, or do you pass it on to IT and you get a yay, you were successful in reporting it to IT. But I kind of go back to the culture. And with charities, they tend to be a lot more vulnerable because there is a culture of trust. Your volunteers, your beneficiaries, your donors, you're doing good deeds, right? Why? And you're good people. Why would anyone go after good people? And so just because of that very basic premise, maybe the guards are down a little as well. And so, you know, there isn't the amount of, I suppose, like financial institutions and so on. You don't necessarily have the funding as well. And hence, charities are seen as a softer target, as more vulnerable.
Absolutely. So one of the things we sort of like to see is what sort of the sort of costs involved. So I get attacked, I'm suffering loss. What sort of money am I looking at? What's my vulnerability there?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of firms that are tracking this quite regularly, and cyber attacks are not new. They've been around for a long time, and folks like Ponemon Institute, there are a bunch of them, McAfee and so on. They do track, and I myself am surprised to see the costs increase so significantly over the years, at least in the last 10 years or so that I've been involved in underwriting cyber. The US obviously tends to be the highest, purely because of the mandatory notifications there, you know, the consumer redress funds that are set up. It's a far more litigious society as well. Fines and penalties tend to be higher. So if you look at that chart up there on the screen, the US is definitely on the top, #1, and it has been for a number of years. If you go down a little bit, we see ASEAN there. And interestingly, the costs from 2022 to 2023 have gone up. And so the average cost of a data breach in the ASEAN region is about $3 million. And ASEAN obviously comprises, you know, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and so on. If we look at Singapore alone, there are some reports which have stated that the cost of a breach in Singapore is in excess of $1 million. And so that's quite a lot of money if you think about it. $1 million is a lot of money compared to Manish's advice that, frankly, you can get support for very little costs, right? And the regulators are also, they have put in place certain financial subsidies for companies as well to access some of the cybersecurity hygiene and defenses and just good, more robust risk management.
Okay, well, you'll be pleased to know that our top question, because you get voted on the questions, which I can see here, is related to insurance. And we're going a bit off piece here, but it's a question about how we sort of underwrite insurance. So how do we size our cyber insurance? Okay, are there correlations between coverage and revenues? How do you do it?
Sure, that's a great question, actually. A bunch of things, and what makes cyber insurance really interesting is that no two companies are the same. And it really is your own experience. So a couple of things that I would look at. I would look at the operational controls. I'd look at technical controls. I'd also look at compliance and governance. So you could have great physical security, but But with cyber, sometimes it's not about who you're trying to keep out. They're already in. They're already in your system, right? So we do underwrite some of the technical controls that you have. What are your various lines of defense, firewalls, etc. So, there can be quite lengthy questionnaires. And this is one area where it's not just the IT department, because very often we're told cyber is an IT department issue. It's not a risk management per se. It's not an HR issue. It's not the CEO's problem. It's an IT problem. But actually, it's not, because cyber impacts every single stakeholder across the entire organization. And so we would look at the efficacy of the controls, but we also want to make sure that there is good governance and compliance, so that there are policies in place and that the policies are in fact being tested. You would have often heard, human beings are the weakest link. You could have the best controls, but if an employee goes and clicks on that phishing email, that's that, right? And so we do ask questions around that. Certainly what industry segment you're involved with, healthcare being the most vulnerable anywhere in the world, year after year after year. And from what I understand, credit cards are less desirable now, right? Because you can quickly cancel your cards, but health information is very, very, very valuable. Would that be right, Manish?
Yeah, let me know if you want some credit card information. Got those available.
There was actually recently some publications about that exact point, which is particularly there's been some breaches of some large health insurers in Australia, for example. So that has kicked off a lot of discussions around the region and globally about the value of health data. And in my own experience, we have dealt with a number of hospitals and medical centers in Singapore, because although financial information can be easily replaced, health information cannot be, and it is very personal to the affected individual. It is not something that you can just erase. And so that alone makes it very, very valuable, much more so than financial information. And actually this study that was published showed that the value of financial information on the dark web has dropped significantly. They had sort of a chart, and you could tell that it had dropped off in value significantly.
That's an interesting point. I have a different twist on that. So personal data or medical data actually is only valuable to each individual. And I think that the Sing Health attack, there's millions of data points out there for medical and the Medicare in Australia and so forth. But actually know where the value comes in if you take the population of that data and you can use it for analysis, but nobody big enough will buy that data. So the data is valuable, but only to the individual. So on the dark web, they try to sell it, but they don't get any buyers, because nobody big is going to come along and say, you know what, I can use that data for a study and make money from it. It's going to be a no-no. So that right now, what we're seeing is large attacks on health data, but
with the hope that the company pays the ransom
exactly
to protect it, to protect their own PR. So
exactly.
that's how the money comes into it, because they say, okay, we're a big health insurer. It's not a very good look for us if we've just released all these people information. We better pay these criminals to keep it secret.
Absolutely.
But that's really the only value. That's where the money comes in.
I suppose the other thing that we sort of should mention, Arati, is that you've got limits of indemnity, right? So you don't necessarily have to buy a 20 million Singapore dollar coverage. You can buy much lower coverages, right? So it's not just a sort of one size fits all approach.
Absolutely. You can buy $1 million. At least you have some protection. And the main benefit, unlike most other insurance, and if I may be bold enough to say, unlike all other insurance policies, well, I stand corrected, maybe a kidnap and ransom policy is in the same is in at that same level. When you buy insurance, you're not just getting protection from a cyber attack. What you're getting access to is the experts. If there's a fire in your building, you're not calling your insurer. Insurer is not going to be able to do a whole lot. You're calling the fire department to help put out the fire. Similarly, when there's a cyber attack and your systems have been compromised, you're calling Manish. There's not a whole lot I can do for you there, right? But Manish can actually come in and help you figure out where the hole is, plug the hole, and Pippa, from a legal perspective, will be able to guide you on your obligations from a legal perspective to your various donors and beneficiaries and so on. And that's what you're actually purchasing. And akin to a kidnap and ransom policy, you're actually purchasing the services of that crisis consultant who's going to do that backdrop in the middle of the ocean, right? And protect and basically bring you safely back home. That's exactly what you're getting out of an insurance policy. It's not just a piece of paper.
That's exactly right. And we've only got 5 minutes left, Arati. So what I was thinking, maybe if we could sort of jump on a bit and just sort of some of the common concerns that stop charities or SMEs from purchasing insurance, lack of awareness, is it, what sort of things are we looking at there?
Lack of awareness, yes, because there's always a little bit of a mindset shift when you are using certain legacy systems or when you're using, something simple. But as technology evolves, you need to kind of keep pace. But I'll kind of go to the next slide in terms of what are some of the objections that we have, which are really, really interesting. We often get told it's a big company problem. We're a charity or we're an SME. It's not going to happen to us. Why would we ever be concerned about this? Because the hackers are not interested in us, right? And I would just say that, if they've not come after you, you've just been lucky that they've not targeted you. No other reason, not because they're not interested in you or because your cyber controls are fantastic. You've just not been a target. And so that whole concept of it's a big company problem, not a small company problem, actually doesn't really hold true. Some of the other objections that we have is that we've got, it's an IT problem, not our problem. So IT's got it covered. They're in good shape. Or we outsource our cybersecurity, or we use the cloud, so it's safe. But again, one of the things that you need to be thinking about is how safe is your outsourcing vendors' systems? Ultimately, at the end of the day, if your data has been breached and your donors' information has been compromised, they're going to come after you. They're going to hold you accountable, not the vendors that you've outsourced to behind the scenes, right? In the interest of time, one of the things that I would say also is that very often we're told cyber insurance is very expensive. It's not really. And expensive is very relative as well. Is a few $1,000s in insurance premium expensive when you might have to shut down the operation altogether? I think it's a very, very small price to pay also for your reputation. So, policies can be tailored, they're modular. If there are certain coverages that you're not interested in, you need not buy those if you're looking to manage your costs. But work with your insurers. I would always say have some protection because you have access to these folks here, as opposed to not even exploring that cover. And frankly, in today's day and age, there isn't a single organization that I haven't spoke to where the senior management are aware of the cyber risks, but they haven't done enough, but it's on their mind. It's what keeps them awake at night. Almost every time it's the top 3 risks that senior executives are concerned about. So talk to your insurer. Insurance policies can be tailored to meet your objectives.
Thank you very much. Now we're in the last minute, believe it or not. That's absolutely flown by. So for those who are staying, who are here, please come join us for a drink. We can take a few more questions. We didn't get to all the questions, unfortunately, but we will try and maybe do that offline. The only other thing that I'd say as well is thank you to Pippa, Manish and Arati. It's been a really good session, and I think we've all learned a little something today.